The courtroom at the federal courthouse in Washington, D.C. was steeped in intense silence as Karoline, the White House press secretary, stepped through the heavy wooden doors. Her hand gripped the leash of Bruno, a German shepherd with a long jagged scar running down his left flank. Every eye in the room turned toward her as she made her way to the center, her steps both hesitant and resolute. Bruno, with a calm yet vigilant demeanor, paced steadily beside her, his ears perked as if ready to detect anything out of the ordinary. Karoline was no ordinary witness. She was here as the White House spokesperson overseeing the trial of Victor Grayson, a former Pentagon official suspected of spying for China. Her role was to ensure sensitive information remained protected, but the situation held a significant unknown. Could she uncover something others had missed? Before diving into the story, comment where you're watching from and don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the latest stories. Judge Daniel Harper, a seasoned legal veteran with silver-streaked hair, leaned forward slightly, observing Karoline with a calm yet piercing gaze. He understood the case carried exceptional weight for national security, a conspiracy against President Donald Trump's administration. Across the courtroom, Victor Grayson sat at the defendant's table, his face eerily composed, almost smug. At 50, he had once been an unremarkable military analyst but now stood accused of selling national security secrets to a foreign power. Grayson was arrested after a tip indicated he attended a clandestine meeting with Chinese operatives, yet his defense was formidable. No concrete physical evidence, no confession, and his legal team was primed to dismantle every accusation. But then, an unexpected moment unfolded. As Karoline took her seat, her sharp green eyes met Grayson's. Her fingers trembled slightly as she made a subtle gesture, a secret signal only those with rigorous training would recognize. It was the cue she had coordinated with Bruno, a dog trained by the Trump administration to detect listening devices and unusual behavior. Only two figures in the room caught the signal: Bruno and Judge Harper. Bruno's reaction was instantaneous. As Karoline's fingers tapped lightly on the table, a silent command, the dog's body stiffened, ears pricked, muscles coiled like a spring ready to launch. A low growl rumbled from Bruno's chest, a sound both warning and menacing. His golden brown eyes locked onto Grayson, unwavering. Their intensity almost piercing. The reaction sent a chill through the courtroom, murmurs rippling through the onlookers. Bruno's behavior wasn't merely that of a trained dog, it was something deeper, almost primal instinct. Judge Harper slammed his gavel on the bench, the sound echoing like thunder in the room. "Court is recessed for 15 minutes, he declared, his voice carrying a rare urgency. Prosecutor Anna Reynolds shot him a questioning look, but Harper didn't respond. Instead, he glanced at Karoline, who stood beside Bruno as if the dog were her steadiest anchor. Something significant had just happened, and he needed time to process it before proceeding. As the courtroom emptied, Harper remained in his seat, his mind racing. In all his years on the bench, he had never seen a trained dog react with such uncanny certainty. What had Bruno detected? And more crucially, what did it mean for the case? Outside in the hallway, Karoline knelt beside Bruno, her hand gripping his fur tightly. Margaret Leavitt, her mother, bent down beside her, brushing her daughter's hair with trembling hands. "Are you okay, sweetheart?" she whispered. Karoline didn't answer, but she didn't need to. Her grip on Bruno tightened, her body pressing against the dog as if seeking comfort. A few steps away, FBI agent Ethan Brooks observed the scene. A seasoned investigator, Brooks had a keen instinct that had cracked numerous high-stakes cases. Now that instinct told him the courtroom incident was a turning point. He approached Judge Harper, his voice low. "I bet my badge Bruno picked up something off about Grayson." Judge Daniel Harper exhaled slowly, his deep blue eyes narrowing, their sharpness cutting through to the truth. "Then we need to figure out what it is," he replied, his tone unshakably resolute. In the defendant's private room, Victor Grayson sat across from his attorney, Thomas Reed, alone now. The smugness on Grayson's face melted away, replaced by a cold, calculating edge. His fingers drummed incessantly on the wooden table, his mind replaying the courtroom moment. Karoline hadn't said a word, but that dog had reacted. "She knows something," Grayson muttered under his breath. Reed raised an eyebrow. "What?" Grayson forced a strange smile. "Nothing," he said, but his mind was in chaos. That damn dog. He hadn't counted on it being a problem. But now, Grayson realized Bruno might be the key to unraveling his entire scheme. As the 15-minute recess neared its end, Judge Harper adjusted his robe and took a deep breath. He didn't believe in coincidence, and his gut told him Bruno had just handed them a critical clue. It was time to dig deeper. For the first time since the trial began at the federal courthouse in Washington, D.C., he felt the momentum shifting. The courtroom buzzed with tension as everyone returned to their places. Victor Grayson, the former Pentagon official accused of espionage for China, sat motionless at the defendant's table. His eyes now betrayed a flicker of unease. Prosecutor Anna Reynolds prepared to resume questioning, but all attention zeroed in on Karoline Leavitt, the White House spokesperson, and Bruno, the German shepherd with the long scar along his left flank. Bruno was no ordinary dog. He was specially trained by the government to detect listening devices, explosives, and erratic behavior. His presence in the trial wasn't just symbolic, it was a top-secret security measure Karoline had insisted upon. Anna Reynolds stepped forward, her voice sharp yet composed. "Your Honor, we have evidence that Mr. Grayson communicated with Chinese operatives for months, passing classified Pentagon information." She presented a stack of documents, but Thomas Reed shot to his feet. "Objection, Your Honor," Reed said smoothly. "No recordings, no photos, just testimony from unreliable sources." Karoline, seated near the prosecution table to oversee sensitive information, tilted her head, studying Grayson. She noticed something off the way he clenched his fists when Reed mentioned recordings. It was a telltale sign of stress she had seen in tense White House briefings. Without hesitation, she tapped her fingers lightly on the table, a secret signal she and Bruno had practiced for years. Bruno's response was immediate. He sprang to his feet, ears erect, nose sniffing the air rapidly. Then, with laser focus, he bolted toward the defendant's table, sniffing around Grayson's chair. A low growl rumbled from Bruno's chest, his golden brown eyes fixed on the area beneath the table. The crowd in the courtroom began to murmur, whispers spreading like waves. Judge Harper banged his gavel again, his face stern. "What's happening, Miss Leavitt?" he demanded, his voice commanding. Karoline stood, her tone calm but cutting. "Your Honor, Bruno is trained to detect listening devices. I believe there's something in this room we haven't seen." Ethan Brooks, stationed near the door, moved in swiftly. He knelt beside Bruno, following the dog's lead. Under Grayson's table, he found a small black device no bigger than a coin, blinking with a faint red light. "A listening device," Brooks announced, his voice ringing through the courtroom. Grayson paled. His hands visibly trembled. Judge Harper slammed his gavel again, harder than ever. "Court is adjourned," he declared. "I'm ordering an immediate sweep of this entire area." Anna Reynolds looked at Karoline with a mix of awe and admiration, while Thomas Reed whispered frantically to his client. Karoline stood still, her hand resting lightly on Bruno's head. Her eyes gleaming with confidence as Judge Daniel Harper's gavel echoed, the security team at the federal courthouse in Washington, D.C. sprang into action. Ethan Brooks, still holding the tiny listening device found under Victor Grayson's table, handed it to a nearby technician. He turned to Judge Harper, his voice firm. "We need to analyze this immediately." With graying hair and sharp brown eyes, Brooks was a veteran FBI agent in the counter-espionage unit, having spent decades hunting ghosts in international conspiracies. He muttered under his breath, "I've seen these before, Chinese tech, unmistakable." His partner Olivia Bennett stepped up beside Karoline, who remained steady next to Bruno. Olivia's voice was soft but resolute. "Miss Leavitt, did you notice anything unusual before signaling?" she asked. Karoline nodded slightly, her hand resting gently on Bruno's head to keep him calm. "I saw Grayson tense up when the prosecutor mentioned recordings. His behavior didn't match his earlier confidence," she replied, her tone crisp yet composed, reflecting her experience as a White House press secretary navigating countless high-pressure situations. Olivia and Ethan exchanged a quick glance. Body language spoke louder than words, and Olivia whispered, "He's hiding something." Prosecutor Anna Reynolds approached, clutching her files. Her eyes flashed with determination. "If that device was active, it could have recorded everything in this room, including what Grayson didn't want us to hear," she said, her voice tinged with hope. Ethan shook his head, rubbing his temple. "We need more than that. A listening device alone won't directly tie him to China, not unless it has specific data linking Grayson." Anna turned to Karoline. "Are you sure Bruno only reacted to this device?" Karoline gave a faint smile. "Bruno's trained to detect any threat devices, explosives, even unusual behavior. If he alerted, it's not just this device. Meanwhile, outside the courtroom, an unexpected witness emerged. Helen Parker, a retired Pentagon employee who once worked under Grayson, approached Ethan. "I heard about the dog. I have information. I saw Grayson meeting a stranger in the Pentagon parking lot. He handed something over. I don't know what, but I remember the other car's license plate. It started with XJR, she said." Ethan's eyes lit up. "That's a lead," he said, jotting it down quickly. Helen nodded. "I didn't speak up sooner because I was scared, but if he's really a spy, I can't stay silent anymore." As the security team swept the courtroom, Karoline stood alone with Bruno in the hallway, her hands stroking his fur gently. She felt the gravity of the moment. This case wasn't just legal, it was a fight to protect national security, a duty the White House had entrusted to her. Bruno looked up at her, his golden brown eyes radiating unwavering loyalty. She whispered, "We'll get to the truth, buddy." But deep down, Karoline knew Grayson wasn't acting alone and the listening device was only the tip of the iceberg. The trial continued, but no one could deny that everything had changed. The tension in the courtroom was palpable as every moment seemed to reveal a new secret. Grayson, once the epitome of composure, was no longer able to mask his growing unease. His calm, collected demeanor was gradually slipping away, replaced by a tension that could be felt by everyone in the room. He had thought he could control the situation, that he could easily escape the charges, but now, everything was shifting. The evidence gathered by the FBI, everything from the warehouse in Virginia to the hard drives filled with classified documents, was beginning to expose a larger story than anyone could have imagined. Grayson was no longer just a simple traitor, he was part of something far more complicated, a network of espionage that stretched far beyond him. Karoline stood at the center of the courtroom, her gaze steady, her resolve unshakable. She had faced many tense moments before, many high-pressure situations, but this was different. This was not just another trial, this was the defense of national security, a confrontation with forces that worked quietly behind the scenes, threatening the stability of everything Karoline had sworn to protect. Grayson sat at the defendant's table, his posture tense, but his eyes betraying a flicker of panic. He had once been sure of himself, confident that he could manipulate the system, but now the walls were closing in. The evidence being presented, the documents, the testimony, it was all turning against him. But what worried him more than anything was that it wasn't just the evidence that was making him sweat. It was the presence of Karoline and Bruno. The dog had picked up on something, and now, Karoline was more determined than ever to see this through. Karoline didn't take her eyes off Grayson as she stood silently, unmoving. She knew what he was feeling. His composure was beginning to crack, and she could sense his fear. But she didn't need to look at him anymore. She had seen enough. She had seen how he clenched his fists when certain words were mentioned, how he tried to keep his expression neutral when the prosecutor presented key evidence. The cracks in his facade were beginning to show. Judge Harper, sitting at his bench, knew that things had taken an unexpected turn. He had read the reports, seen the evidence, but nothing had prepared him for the moment when Karoline's signal had triggered Bruno's reaction. He had never seen a trained dog respond with such certainty. He didn't believe in coincidences. This moment, this trial, had become something more than just a legal proceeding. It was now about uncovering a conspiracy, a threat to national security that could go much deeper than anyone had initially realized. As the recess ended, Karoline and Bruno re-entered the courtroom. The room fell silent again as all eyes turned toward them. Grayson, who had been calm just moments before, now looked uneasy. He shifted in his seat, the weight of the trial settling heavily on him. His once confident facade was starting to crumble, piece by piece. Prosecutor Anna Reynolds stood and presented more evidence, documents, photos, and records of Grayson's meetings with Chinese operatives. As she laid the facts bare, Grayson seemed to shrink further into his chair. His hand trembled slightly when she mentioned recordings. Karoline noticed it immediately. She had seen this behavior before, the telltale signs of someone who was hiding something. Without thinking, her fingers tapped the table, a subtle gesture, but one that Bruno recognized instantly. Bruno stood up, his body tense, ears erect. He moved quickly toward Grayson's table, sniffing the air, his nose working furiously. His growl was low, but it rumbled through the courtroom, loud enough to cause an audible gasp from the onlookers. Grayson's eyes widened, and for the first time, there was visible fear in his expression. Judge Harper's gavel slammed down again, this time with more force. "Court is recessed for 15 minutes, he said firmly. "We need to investigate what this is about." The tension in the room was thick as everyone began to talk among themselves. Karoline stayed still, her gaze locked on Grayson. Bruno, sensing the intensity in the air, did not move, but his body remained rigid, his attention still focused on the defendant. Outside the courtroom, Karoline knelt beside Bruno, her hand resting on his fur. She could feel the tension mounting inside her, but she knew that she couldn't show it. She had a job to do, and she wasn't going to back down now. Margaret Leavitt, Karoline's mother, came over and gently brushed her daughter's hair. "Are you okay, sweetheart?" she whispered. Karoline didn't answer, but her grip on Bruno's leash tightened. She didn't need to speak. Bruno's presence calmed her, giving her the strength to carry on. The sense of purpose she felt was stronger than ever. This trial wasn't just about Grayson, it was about protecting the truth and securing the future of the country she had sworn to protect. FBI agent Ethan Brooks approached, his face grim. "We have a lead," he said quietly. "There's more going on here. We think Grayson is only a small part of a larger operation. This listening device, it's just the beginning. We need to dig deeper." Karoline nodded, her mind racing. She knew that the discovery of the listening device was just the tip of the iceberg. There was more to this case than anyone had anticipated, and she would not stop until every last secret had been uncovered. Judge Harper remained in the courtroom, his mind racing. He didn't believe in coincidences, and he was beginning to suspect that the truth was more complicated than anyone had realized. The more evidence that came forward, the clearer it became that Grayson wasn't acting alone. And now, with Bruno's help, they had a crucial piece of the puzzle. As the 15-minute recess passed, the atmosphere in the courtroom shifted. Everyone knew that the next phase of the trial was about to begin, and it would change everything. Karoline, Bruno, and the entire team were ready to face whatever came next. The truth was coming to light, and no one, especially Grayson, was prepared for what was to come. The trial continued, but no one could deny that everything had changed. The courtroom atmosphere was thick with tension, as each passing moment seemed to uncover another layer of the story. Grayson, once calm and composed, could no longer hide the unease creeping into his every action. His cool exterior was starting to crumble. He had thought he could control the situation, that he could slip through the cracks of the law, but now everything was different. The evidence, from the warehouse in Virginia to the hard drives filled with classified documents, was beginning to tell a much bigger story. Grayson was no longer just a simple traitor, he was a part of something far more dangerous, a web of espionage much larger than anyone had anticipated. Karoline stood at the center of the courtroom, her gaze unwavering, her resolve stronger than ever. She had faced moments of high tension before, moments where everything was on the line, but this was different. This wasn't just another trial, it was a fight for national security, a confrontation with hidden forces working quietly to tear apart everything Karoline had sworn to protect. Grayson sat at the defendant's table, trying to maintain his composure, but his eyes told a different story. The calm facade was gone, replaced by the unease that everyone in the room could feel. Karoline could see it clearly, the way he shifted in his seat when certain pieces of evidence were presented, the subtle tension in his body when key phrases were spoken. His mind was unraveling. What once seemed like a well-orchestrated plan was falling apart right in front of him. As the prosecutor, Anna Reynolds, continued her case, Karoline stayed silent, but her eyes never left Grayson. She was studying his every move, noticing every sign of stress, every twitch of his fingers. She could tell something was amiss, that Grayson was not the calm, controlled figure he had appeared to be. His reaction to the presentation of evidence, the subtle signs of panic, spoke volumes to her. Judge Harper, sitting at the bench, could feel the shift in the room. He had seen enough in his years as a judge to know when a case was not as straightforward as it appeared. This trial, with its layers of deception and hidden truths, was unlike any he had presided over. The evidence kept mounting, and the more they dug, the more they realized that Grayson was just a small part of a much larger conspiracy. As the recess ended and the proceedings resumed, Karoline re-entered the courtroom with Bruno by her side. The room was electric with anticipation. All eyes focused on Karoline and the dog, Bruno. The atmosphere was charged. Grayson, now more visibly uncomfortable, shifted in his seat. His once confident demeanor had given way to the fear that was slowly consuming him. The tension in the room was palpable, and Karoline knew that this was the turning point. The moment Karoline took her seat, she made the slightest gesture with her fingers, a subtle signal. Bruno immediately stood up, his ears erect, his body tensed, and with precision, he moved towards Grayson's table. He sniffed the air, then sniffed around the chair where Grayson sat. A low growl rumbled from Bruno's chest, and the intensity of his stare never wavered. The courtroom fell silent, a collective gasp rising as Bruno's behavior became more intense. His reaction was not just that of a well-trained dog, it was something deeper, an instinctual response that Karoline had seen countless times before. Judge Harper banged his gavel down, the sharp sound echoing through the courtroom. "Court is recessed for 15 minutes, he declared, his voice firm with urgency. "We need to investigate what this is." The tension in the room was nearly unbearable. The courtroom erupted into murmurs as everyone tried to process what had just happened. Karoline stayed calm, her hand resting lightly on Bruno's head as she watched Grayson. He had been caught off guard by the dog's reaction. His mask of composure was slipping, and for the first time, his body language betrayed him. He was on edge, clearly unsettled by the attention that Bruno's behavior had drawn. Outside the courtroom, Karoline knelt beside Bruno, her fingers running through the dog's fur. She could feel the weight of the moment. They had uncovered something important, but this was just the beginning. The real test was what came next. Bruno had detected something no one else had, something Grayson was trying to hide. And now, it was up to them to uncover what that was. Margaret, Karoline's mother, came to her side, brushing a few strands of hair from her daughter's face. "Are you okay, sweetheart?" she asked softly. Karoline didn't respond with words. Instead, she looked down at Bruno, who had remained perfectly still. The dog's focus never wavered, and Karoline felt the familiar sense of calm wash over her. She wasn't alone in this, she had Bruno by her side, and together, they would find the truth. FBI agent Ethan Brooks approached, his voice low and serious. "We've found something," he said. "A lead. Grayson's not working alone. There's a much bigger operation going on. We need to follow this through." Karoline nodded, her mind already shifting into action mode. They had the lead they needed, but the question was, where would it take them? She knew they had to act fast. Grayson was unraveling, but so were the people behind him, and they were much more dangerous. As Karoline and Bruno re-entered the courtroom, the mood was thick with anticipation. Everyone in the room knew this trial had taken a turn they hadn't expected. Grayson was no longer the calm, collected figure he had been at the start. He was on the defensive now, and it was clear that he was losing control. Anna Reynolds continued her questioning, presenting more evidence, documents, photos, and recordings. Each piece of evidence was another nail in Grayson's coffin. But Karoline was focused. She wasn't just watching Grayson, she was watching the entire room. She could feel the tension rising again, the realization that they were closing in on the truth. Grayson, desperate, shot a quick glance at his lawyer, Thomas Reed, and muttered something under his breath. His anxiety was palpable. The walls were closing in, and Karoline knew that he was about to break. The question was whether he would crack under pressure and expose the entire network of spies, or if he would continue to protect them. Judge Harper, seeing the mounting tension, decided to act. He looked at Karoline and then at Grayson, his eyes sharp and calculating. "Mr. Grayson," he said, his voice calm but forceful. "If you wish to change your plea, now is the time." Grayson hesitated for a moment. His fingers drummed nervously on the table as his mind raced. And then, in a moment of weakness, he spoke. I can't keep hiding it," he said, his voice shaking. "But I'm not the only one. There's a whole network behind me. I'm just the one who got caught." A ripple of shock ran through the courtroom. Karoline's heart pounded in her chest. This was it. Grayson was cracking. The truth was starting to come out. The tension reached its peak as Grayson continued. "I can take you to the place where it all started. The place where they keep everything. But you have to promise me protection. They'll come after me if I talk." Judge Harper's gaze was steady, unwavering. "You will have protection, Mr. Grayson, but you must tell us everything. If you want to make this right, now is your chance." As Grayson began to provide more details, Karoline's mind was already racing. This was a breakthrough. But she knew that the road ahead would be dangerous. Grayson was only one piece of the puzzle, and the real challenge was uncovering the full scope of the conspiracy. With Bruno by her side, Karoline was ready to take the next step, whatever it might bring. The game was changing, and she wasn't about to back down now. The trial continued, but it was clear that everything had shifted. The tension in the room was palpable as everyone waited for the next move. Grayson, once confident and composed, now appeared to be unraveling. His calm exterior was slipping away, replaced by signs of panic and fear. The evidence against him was piling up, and he knew he was losing control. The once dominant figure now seemed like a man on the edge, trying to hold on to his last threads of confidence. What had once seemed like a well-managed operation was quickly spiraling into chaos, and Grayson was at the center of it all. Karoline stood at the forefront, unmoving, her eyes locked onto Grayson. She had been in high-pressure situations before, but this was different. This wasn't just a courtroom drama, it was a battle to uncover the truth and protect national security. Every moment that passed felt like a step closer to exposing the conspiracy that had been carefully hidden beneath layers of deceit. The more Grayson tried to defend himself, the more his facade crumbled. Karoline noticed every subtle shift in his demeanor. His hands were no longer steady, his fingers twitched, a nervous tic that betrayed his panic. The walls were closing in on him, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. Anna Reynolds, the prosecutor, kept her cool, presenting more damning evidence. Each document, each piece of testimony, all pointed to one undeniable truth: Grayson had betrayed his country. But Karoline knew there was more. She knew that the deeper they dug, the more secrets they would uncover, and it wasn't just Grayson they were after. He was just a small part of a much larger operation, one that spanned continents and involved powerful figures they hadn't even begun to identify. Grayson's eyes flicked nervously around the room. He was trying to stay calm, trying to hold on to whatever little control he had left. But it was clear that he was no longer in charge. Karoline and Bruno had turned the tide of the trial. His every move was being scrutinized, and the weight of his guilt was becoming too much to bear. In the middle of the tension, Grayson made a decision. It was a desperate move, one that revealed just how much he was willing to lose. He leaned forward slightly, his voice barely above a whisper. "I can't keep hiding it," he said, his words trembling. "There's more. There are people, powerful people, behind all of this. I'm just the one who got caught." The room fell silent. Grayson's admission hung in the air, like a bombshell ready to explode. Karoline's heart raced. This was the moment she had been waiting for, the moment when Grayson would finally crack open the conspiracy that had been festering for so long. Grayson looked around at the room, his face pale and drawn. "I didn't want to be a part of this," he said. "But I had no choice. They threatened my family, my career. It was all too much. But now, I can't hide it anymore." Karoline's mind raced. She had known that Grayson wasn't working alone. She had suspected from the beginning that he was part of something much bigger. But hearing him finally admit it, hearing him say the words that confirmed everything, was both a relief and a new challenge. She could feel the weight of the moment settle over her. The stakes were higher than ever. "I can take you to the place where it all started," Grayson continued, his voice trembling. "I can show you where they've been hiding everything, the plans, the documents, the contacts. But you have to promise me protection. If I tell you everything, they'll come after me. I'm not safe. None of us will be safe if I talk." Karoline glanced at Judge Harper, who nodded solemnly. "You will have protection, Mr. Grayson," he said, his voice firm. "But you must tell us everything. If you wish to redeem yourself, now is the time to cooperate fully." Grayson hesitated, his hands shaking. He had already crossed a line. Now, there was no turning back. He knew he had no other choice but to reveal everything. The consequences were inevitable, but he had reached the point of no return. "I'll tell you what I know," he said finally. "But you have to be quick. If they find out I'm talking, it will be too late." The tension in the courtroom reached its peak. The truth was finally coming to light, but the clock was ticking. Karoline felt a surge of urgency. This was the breakthrough they had been waiting for, but they had to act fast. Grayson might be ready to talk, but the people behind him were not going to sit idly by. If they didn't move quickly, they could lose everything. As Grayson began to speak, revealing the network of espionage that had been operating right under their noses, Karoline's mind raced. She knew this was just the beginning. Grayson was only a small piece of a much larger puzzle, and the true scope of the conspiracy was still unknown. But for the first time in the trial, Karoline felt a sense of hope. They were getting closer to the truth. Grayson continued to provide information, detailing the contacts, the locations, and the operations that had been set up over the years. He spoke quickly, fear evident in his voice. His words were a jumble of names and places, but they were enough to give the investigators a lead. A place, a safe house, where they could find the rest of the evidence they needed to bring the whole operation to light. As the courtroom session came to an end, Karoline knew that the battle was far from over. But she was ready for whatever came next. She had come this far, and she wouldn't stop now. With Bruno by her side, she left the courtroom, her mind focused on the task ahead. She knew that they would have to move quickly, that every second counted. The people behind Grayson were out there, waiting. But Karoline wasn't about to let them win. She had the truth on her side, and she would stop at nothing to ensure that it came to light. The trial continued, but it was clear that everything had shifted. The atmosphere in the courtroom was thick with tension, as everyone waited for the next move. Grayson, once confident and composed, now appeared to be unraveling. His calm exterior was slipping away, replaced by signs of panic and fear. The evidence against him was piling up, and he knew he was losing control. What had once seemed like a well-managed operation was now falling apart, and Grayson found himself at the center of it all. Karoline stood firm, her gaze unwavering, her determination stronger than ever. She had been through high-pressure situations before, but this was different. This wasn't just another trial, it was a fight for national security, a confrontation with hidden forces working in the shadows, threatening everything Karoline had sworn to protect. Grayson sat at the defendant's table, his posture tense, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of panic. He had once been confident that he could outsmart everyone, that he could manipulate the situation to his advantage. But now, as the evidence mounted, he realized the walls were closing in. His composure was gone. Karoline had seen through him. She had noticed the subtle shifts in his demeanor, the small signs of stress that no one else had picked up on. Anna Reynolds, the prosecutor, continued to present more damning evidence, but Karoline was focused on Grayson. She wasn't looking at the evidence, she was studying the defendant. Every movement, every twitch of his fingers, every look he gave, Karoline was paying attention to it all. She knew that something was off, that Grayson wasn't acting alone. The way he shifted in his seat, the way he clenched his fists, it was all telling her that he was hiding something much bigger than anyone had realized. Judge Harper, who had seen his fair share of high-stakes trials, could feel the shift in the room. He had a sense that things were not as they seemed. This trial was no longer just about Grayson. It was about uncovering a much larger conspiracy, one that could shake the foundations of national security. The evidence was starting to paint a picture of something much more dangerous than just one man's betrayal. The more they uncovered, the clearer it became that Grayson was just a pawn in a larger game. As the recess ended, Karoline and Bruno re-entered the courtroom. The atmosphere was electric. Everyone in the room knew that the trial had reached a turning point. Grayson, who had once exuded confidence, now seemed more fragile, more vulnerable than ever before. He shifted in his seat, clearly uncomfortable with the attention on him. The walls were closing in, and he could feel it. Karoline made a subtle gesture with her fingers, a signal that only Bruno understood. The German shepherd, trained to detect unusual behavior, responded immediately. Bruno stood up, his ears erect, his body tense. He walked toward Grayson's table, sniffing the air, his nose working rapidly. His growl was low, but it was enough to send a shiver through the courtroom. Bruno's behavior was not typical of a trained dog, it was instinctive. He had sensed something in the room, something dangerous. The tension in the courtroom was palpable. Everyone was watching, waiting for the next move. Judge Harper slammed his gavel down, silencing the room. "Court is recessed for 15 minutes, he declared, his voice carrying an urgency that had not been present before. "We need to investigate this further." Karoline stood still, her eyes never leaving Grayson. She knew what this meant. Bruno had detected something Grayson was trying to hide. The discovery of the listening device was only the beginning. There were more layers to this case, and they were just starting to peel them back. Outside the courtroom, Karoline knelt beside Bruno, her hand gently stroking his fur. She could feel the weight of the moment pressing on her shoulders. This wasn't just a trial. This was a battle for the truth, for national security. And she wasn't going to let anything or anyone stand in her way. Her mother, Margaret, stepped closer, brushing a strand of hair from Karoline's face. "Are you okay, sweetheart?" she asked softly. Karoline didn't respond. She didn't need to. Her bond with Bruno was stronger than any words. He was her anchor, her ally in this fight. Together, they would uncover the truth, no matter the cost. FBI agent Ethan Brooks approached, his face serious. "We've found something," he said quietly. "We think Grayson's not working alone. There's a larger operation, and we need to move fast." Karoline nodded, her mind already working. They had the breakthrough they needed, but the clock was ticking. Grayson was a part of something much bigger, and if they didn't act quickly, they could lose their chance to stop it. As Karoline and Bruno re-entered the courtroom, the atmosphere was tense. Everyone knew that the next phase of the trial would change everything. Grayson was no longer in control. The truth was slowly coming to light, but there was still much to uncover. Karoline focused on Grayson, watching as he shifted uncomfortably in his seat. The facade he had so carefully built was starting to crack, and the fear in his eyes was unmistakable. The truth was too close now for him to escape. Anna Reynolds presented more evidence, each new piece of information pushing Grayson further into a corner. But Karoline knew this was just the beginning. The real challenge was not just exposing Grayson, but uncovering the full extent of the conspiracy he was part of. As the trial continued, Grayson began to speak, revealing more about the operation he had been involved in. His voice trembled as he spoke of the people behind the network, the powerful figures who had been pulling the strings. His admissions were coming fast now, one after another, and Karoline could feel the momentum building. "I can't hide it anymore," Grayson said, his voice barely a whisper. "There are others, people with more power, more influence than I ever had. They've been controlling everything from the shadows. I didn't want this, but I couldn't escape." The courtroom was silent. Karoline's heart raced. Grayson was breaking down, but he was also giving them the key they needed to unravel everything. He had confirmed what Karoline had suspected all along: the network was much bigger than just him. Grayson's eyes flicked nervously toward his lawyer, Thomas Reed. "I can show you where it all started," Grayson said, his voice cracking with fear. "I can take you to the place where they've been hiding everything. But you have to promise me protection. If I tell you everything, they'll come after me." Karoline glanced at Judge Harper, who nodded. "We'll protect you, Grayson. But you must tell us everything. We need to know everything you know, or none of this will matter." Grayson hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "I'll tell you," he said. "But you have to move quickly. They'll come for me, and they'll come for you too." The room was charged with anticipation. This was the moment they had been waiting for, the moment when the entire conspiracy could be exposed. Karoline knew that they had to act fast. The people behind Grayson weren't going to sit back and let this happen. They would do whatever it took to protect themselves. As Grayson continued to speak, detailing the locations and the names of key players in the operation, Karoline felt the weight of the responsibility on her shoulders. She had the truth, but it was up to her to make sure it didn't slip away. With Bruno at her side, Karoline left the courtroom, her mind racing with what needed to be done next. She wasn't just a witness in this trial, she was part of something much bigger. And she would stop at nothing to uncover the full truth.